today I came up with a theme of old dog, new tricks, right? And we've all heard that expression, right? You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Probably used it at some point in our lives when explaining maybe our behavior or the actions of someone else. It's convenient. The origin of "you can't teach an old dog new tricks" comes from the mid 1500s. It's one of the oldest idiomatic expressions in English, and the original use of the phrase appears in The Book of Husbandry. And I really want to have an accent when I read this because the Old English is written in a weird way. I'm going to try and fight the urge. But John Fitzherbert published it in 1534, and it said, "And he, a shepherd, must teach his dog to bark when he would have him, to run when he would have him, and to leave running when he would have him. Or else he is not a cunning shepherd. The dog must learn it when he is a whelp, or else it will not be, for it is hard to make an old dog to stop." It also shows up in a dialogue containing the number in effect of all the proverbs in the English tongue, published in 1546. And a more modern version of the expression showed up in 1721 in a book called Diverse Proverbs, authored by Nathan Bailey. While it isn't the exact version of what we use today, it's close. An old dog will learn no tricks. Now, in my research, I couldn't find when it exactly became some kind of cultural rule, though. At what point did it become an excuse to stop learning and growing? The old dog mindset can wreak lots of havoc. If we look at our country right now, entrenched racism and misogyny, the practices of the founding old dogs, have helped to ignite renewed vigor in limiting the rights of women and our LGBTQ siblings, in continuing the needless slaughter of Black men and women via police and prisons, and a wholesale failure to care about public safety, especially the safety of children, by clinging to an arcane Second Amendment. Florida's latest shenanigans are a wonderful example of an effort to maintain the old dog mindset as they ban the teaching of real American history, which means including the truth of African American history. In my various work over the years, this old dog mentality has shown up in this one phrase: "This is the way we've always done things. Don't try to change it." Entrenched mindsets and entrenched behaviors actively limit our possibilities. We must, however, become comfortable breaking away from the way things have always been, whether on a small scale in our families, our church community, or larger national and global society. The first step, I believe, is that we have to be willing to learn. We have to be really ready to admit that we don't know all the things. And perhaps need to be interested in practicing the Buddhist concept of beginner's mind. I've always been a believer and follower of the concept of lifelong learning and entering into situations with beginner's mind. So this excerpt from Lion's Roar sums it up. As Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi famously said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's, there are few." When we start to learn anything for the first time, we are fresh, curious, and open to all possibilities. Our mind is not yet solid with concepts, opinions, and certainties. This beginner's mind is awakened mind itself, which is beyond concepts and opinion. It is the don't know mind that is the essence of meditation, and we should never lose it. So I went to seminary at age 47 after already having a PhD and careers and a child because I knew there was more I wanted to learn. And it was interesting because I recall very clearly talking about beginner's mind in one of my interfaith classes and getting strange looks from the young folks, like 20 years younger than me. And one even turned and said, I don't want to do that. Okay, different strokes, I suppose. But it has always served me. It has made me open. It has kept me curious. It has helped me practice humility. It has allowed me to release my ego and my need to know or to be right, which I believe has served me well. So, when my spiritual director and I were talking one day about a year ago, she said, Leonisa, I think you're not getting enough creative time. You need to tap into your creativity again. You sound frustrated and maybe a little sad. My immediate response was that I'd start making music again, as that had always been my go to for creativity and an artistic outlet. She very quickly said, Nope, that's something you already know. I want you to try something brand new. Now, since music was always my art, I never really explored fine arts. I had a stint making jewelry in the 80s and 90s. And when I worked with kids on and off, I'd dabble alongside them with coloring or making collages. But really, art and art making was not anything I believed I had a talent for. A few months prior to my spiritual director's suggestion, my daughter and I had toured the Kingston Ceramic Studio, which was part of the Art Walk annually in Kingston, New York. I have long loved pottery. I think it's an Italian genetic thing. I have a collection of bowls from around the world. So I thought, I'm going to sign up for a class at this studio. I did. And this old dog put on clothes that could get dirty, and I went to play with clay. On the first day, we did some hand building. I imagine there's probably some ceramic artists out here. Are there? Right? All right. Okay. On the first day, we did some hand building, and I learned the basics, and I learned really quickly that clay is quite responsive. One false move, and you're off in a different direction. And that one move could also be a direction towards new ideas. I also learned that it took patience. There is no rushing in pottery. Each step of the way must be mindful. I learned this even more when, during a subsequent class, I began throwing on a wheel. One moment of distraction, and that blob of clay was off center or had gone from a vessel to a catastrophe in the blink of an eye. I find the wheel incredibly frustrating. My frustration at the wheel continues to be real, but the more I accepted my role as a learner, it was quite easy to dive into this mindful practice, even if things didn't always work out. And especially when I listened to my teacher, Ben. Patience was also learned because you can't make a thing in one day. You have to create your piece, which takes time. A few weeks ago, I hand built this large bowl, and I was there for over 3 hours. I had been so absorbed, it became a spiritual practice. It wasn't until my stomach was grumbling that I realized I had to leave, but I was so relaxed. Anyway, then after you make the thing, you have to fire it in a kiln. And in a communal studio space, that could take a while. So you wait, and there's no choice in it. You have to wait. And then it comes out, and you agonize over the glaze. Do I underglaze it first? What colors should I use? Can I try to layer them to make it as interesting as the pots I see in other places? What effect will it have? And then you do all that. And then you wait again for it to be fired for a second time. And then you hope that what comes out is to your liking. I can say that since this whole undertaking was new to me and I had no attachment to the outcome, everything I made, lumpy, too thick, too thin, just right, it's like oatmeal, I guess, brought me joy because I had loved the process. So, this is the first thing I created, this cuppy thingy, right? It's with brown clay, a little lumpy. At the last minute, I decided I'm going to stick some leaves on the side. It sort of can work as a mug, so I sort of use it for tea. Right? This is the first thing I created. And it was after the third class 3 weeks later, I finally brought it home and I was like a little kid. I was just so excited to show it to my daughter and husband. Rafaela said, "Oh, Mama, that's so nice." I think she was just being kind. Um, Michael, my husband, just looked at it and sort of nodded, or I don't know if there was an eyebrow raised or one of those dog head tilts. And I got so mad at him. I'm, and he astutely read my face, began to backpedal, and said, "But honey, you are always so good at everything." I have his approval to share this story in public. Okay. And I appreciated where he was coming from, right? Because I'm competent, right? And when I or any of us who are deemed learned or competent or effective or successful, whatever that means, right? When we do something new or something out of the ordinary, we might raise a few eyebrows, especially if it's not up to the standard people are used to. And so it got me wondering if that's what holds us old dogs back. The fear of making a mistake or making something less than perfect or getting quizzical looks. Or is it even just the fear of endeavoring to try something different, whether it's art or a new way of thinking or an idea you've wanted to explore or a new way of being? Maybe it's that fear that holds us back. Maybe it's that, not that old dogs can't learn new tricks, it's that we won't. So, as I mentioned, working with clay has taught me a number of things. First, it's okay to be a learner, a newbie. It's also okay to say, "Oh my God, I don't know. I don't know this. I don't know what I'm doing." Or to ask a teacher, mentor, minister, friend, colleague, 20 something, a question out of curiosity and learning. And I want to point out that this is different than asking a question that you're setting up so that you can be the one with the right answer, right? This not knowing can be incredibly rich. I think this becomes harder the older we get because society tells us that we are an expert or we deem ourselves experts. God, that's a limiting concept. About 25 years ago, I was in a taxi with my mentor, Dr. Betty Reardon, heading back to Colombia from the UN, the United Nations, where she was guiding us in an internship there. And I was ranting about how the speaker that day just didn't seem to be an expert on the topic she was talking about, and it felt like a waste. And Betty, who is now 94 and still doing this work and still calling me out on my stuff, Betty, as she was known to do then, turned and asked me, why did she need to be an expert for you to listen to what she was saying? Our conversation continued, and then she said something along the lines of, "Don't be fooled by that term expert. None of us are experts. This is a person who founded an entire field. I just want to point that out, right? Right? She said, none of us are experts. And if we think if we think that we are, we're just telling the world that we've decided to stop learning. So I continue to eschew the term and concept of expert. May I never be an expert at pottery. I've also relearned that it's okay to not be attached to the outcome, but to dig into the process. In my peace work, it seems that the world we live in is so attached to outcome that we forget or ignore the work that we must do and the learning and growth that happens during the doing. I've also learned that outcome can be uncertain or can shift. So instead of being attached to outcome, we can be open to outcome. I worked on this vase a few weeks ago, tall thing, and then I put it in the waiting to be fired shelf. And a few days later, I got a message on our Slack channel that it had a giant crack in it. When I came to the studio a few days later, I asked the ceramicist, why did she think it happened? And she explained, pardon, that it dried too fast. I had put my almost but not quite leather hard vase into the room with the kilns, which is hot. This rushed the drying process and thus my vase cracked. I learned you can't rush. And that was a really good learning for me. Hours of work gone. But that crack didn't negate the joy and the focus and the satisfaction I felt while making that vase. And then I took that broken vase to the clay reclaim bucket, and in almost ritual-like manner, I broke it into pieces and watched those pieces fall into the bucket with other failed attempts. And in time, that bucket of thwarted efforts became new clay for all of us to try again. Finally, this new endeavor in the ceramic arts has given me a perspective on vision. When I'm climbing the 3 flights to the studio, I have an idea, a vision for a piece. I get to the studio and I do the steps needed to get me there with flexibility, curiosity, humility, and non-attachment. Inevitably, along the way, something shifts. A studio member suggests something to me that I had never thought of or learned or didn't know how to do. Or I gouge into the piece with a fingernail. It just happens a lot, even though I cut them. Or the form I've created just can't hold itself against the force of gravity. And thus, I adapt. I still have an idea in mind, but I know I also have to go where the clay takes me. And in real life, I know that I have a clear vision for the world I want to be a part of creating. I've had roughly the same vision for about 35 years. And I know, though, I need flexibility, a curious mind, an open heart, and a willingness to listen and learn from others. And nowadays, that often means listening to others who are younger than I am. For that world to come into being, that's what I have to do. That's what we have to do. And I know that the path to that vision may be long and have bumps in the road, but I want to see it happen, to build it. And I want to enjoy the transformative possibilities along the way, in me, in clay, and in the people I surround myself with.